your storyteller, here to share a story that will help you drift off into peaceful sleep. If you haven't already, like the video and subscribe to join our community. Let the soothing sounds of rain and wind surround you as you settle in. It was an ordinary day when I received the call. My name is Warren Whitman, a forest ranger working the Tall Trees Trail at Redwood National Park. I've seen my fair share of strange wildlife encounters, campers straying off paths, and the occasional odd occurrence that most people would chalk up to mere imagination. But this was different. It started like any other day, on September 28th. I had just come back from a quick fishing trip with my brother, and the serenity of the forest always brought me a sense of peace. But that afternoon, things changed. I'd just sat down at the station to finish some paperwork when the phone rang, snapping me from my thoughts. It was Judy, one of the dispatch operators, her voice tight with concern. "Frank, we have a situation," she said, her words clipped. "Two hikers, Mike Brennan and Tom Schultz, haven't checked back in. Their campsite was registered near Tall Trees Grove. Can you go check it out?" I grabbed my gear and threw it into my pack. 2.5 hours late wasn't catastrophic, but in these woods, every minute matters. The trees are ancient, and they hold secrets far darker than most people realize. When I arrived at the trailhead, a palpable sense of unease gripped me. The usual vibrant sounds of nature were eerily absent. No birds, no rustling of small animals, not even the whisper of the wind through the trees. The silence was suffocating, as if the forest itself had gone still. I radioed Judy, telling her I was starting the search, and set off down the trail. Normally, I find the Tall Trees Trail peaceful, majestic even, with towering redwoods standing like silent sentinels, their trunks disappearing into the sky. But today, it felt different. There was something wrong. About a mile in, I realized how strange it was. No sounds, no movement, just an unsettling stillness that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. And then, just when I was about to dismiss it as my imagination, I spotted it. The campsite, or rather, what was left of it. A mess. The tent was half collapsed, the fabric torn in places, as if something had ripped through it. Scattered gear and shredded clothing littered the ground, but something in my gut told me that this wasn't a case of hikers rushing off in a panic. No, this was something far more sinister. I drew my revolver, a precaution, though I never thought I'd need it in these woods. "Mike, Tom," I called out, my voice too loud in the unnerving silence. Nothing. I knelt to inspect the ground. Footprints, but they weren't human. They were too large, the shape too elongated, like a handprint, but made by something with claws. Something massive. I felt a chill crawl down my spine. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. A bear, but the prints didn't match. These were something else entirely. I radioed Judy again, but the static on the line was worse than usual, only adding to the eerie atmosphere. When I turned back to the campsite, I saw something that made my heart stop. The pack. Mike's pack, mostly intact, with a wallet inside. But when I opened it, I saw the driver's license. Mike Brennan, 26. I had no doubt this was his. But as I moved further into the area, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A hiking boot Tom's, probably, and inside it, a foot, severed, cleanly cut at the ankle. A twig snapped behind me. I spun around, drawing my revolver instinctively, my heart pounding in my ears. "Who's there?" I called out. "This is Ranger Whitman. If you're out there, show yourself." Silence, and then I heard it. A low, guttural growl, like nothing I'd ever heard before. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a mountain lion. It was something else. I turned toward the sound, my eyes scanning the trees. Something was out there, watching. The sense of being hunted filled my chest with dread. I backed away, my hand tightening on the revolver. Whatever had done this wasn't some wild animal. It was something far more dangerous, and it wasn't done yet. The growls grew louder, closer, and I knew in my gut that I was no longer the hunter. I was the prey. I quickly scanned the campsite one last time. My eyes caught on the backpack again, the one that was still partially intact. It was no use. I couldn't ignore it. I needed answers. As I pulled out what I could, I froze. There it was, sound, soft at first, like branches shifting. I stepped forward, the revolver still drawn, but it wasn't just the forest whispering now. There was something moving, something big. I turned sharply, my flashlight in hand, cutting through the thickening darkness. There, among the towering trees, I saw it. A shape, impossibly tall, like a silhouette of something large and hunched over. Its eyes gleamed faintly in the shadows, glowing with a cold, unnatural light. It was then I realized just how close the danger was. The forest had been silent for too long. The creature's head snapped in my direction, and it came for me. The creature's eyes burned through the trees, glowing with a cold, unearthly light. It was like nothing I had ever seen before, hulking shape, barely visible in the shadows of the towering redwoods. It moved with terrifying speed, its massive body shifting unnaturally between the trunks. The growl was low, vibrating the air around me like a storm, ready to break. My fingers tightened around the revolver. My heart was hammering in my chest, but I couldn't just stand there. I couldn't afford to freeze. I backed away slowly, my boots crunching against the wet forest floor. Every part of my body screamed for me to run, to get as far away as I could, but I couldn't if I ran. It would know. It would hunt me. I kept my eyes on the shadow, but it was gone before I could blink. Just like that, it had vanished into the trees. The air was thick with the scent of something wrong. The growls had stopped, but my body was still on edge, waiting for the next attack. The woods were unnervingly silent again, but the danger was still there. My hands shook as I raised the flashlight, the beam flickering. My mind raced, trying to piece together what I had just seen. The beast, whatever it was, didn't move like any animal I knew. It had been too quick, too agile for something so large. I knew I had to get back to the station. I had to report the bodies, the damage to the camp, the whatever that creature was. But the fog had grown thicker, and I had lost track of the trail. The path ahead was lost in the haze, the towering trees around me, shifting in and out of view. It was almost as if the forest itself was playing tricks on me, making the path stretch longer and longer with each step I took. The feeling of being watched never left. Every rustle, every creak of a branch made my stomach flip, and I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see those glowing eyes staring back at me. I tried the radio again, but the static came through so loudly it hurt my ears. "Judy, are you there? Do you copy?" I shouted into the radio, but there was nothing, not even a crackle of life from the speaker. The silence was complete. As I moved forward, I felt the cold air pressing against me, the fog swirling around my legs like hands reaching up to drag me down. The weight of it was suffocating, as if the forest was growing closer, trapping me in its grip. Then, the ground shifted beneath me, again this time much harder. I stumbled, barely catching myself before I could fall, my eyes widening as I saw what had caused it. There a massive, twisted root, rising up from the ground like the hand of some ancient beast, cracked and split the earth. It felt wrong, unnatural. The trees around me were all bent strangely, their branches stretching upward, like claws reaching toward the sky. I backed away from the route, my breath catching in my throat as I realized just how far the forest had changed. The trees were closer now, their branches more twisted, their trunks now thick with dark bark, almost like veins running through them. And that's when I saw it, a figure, not one of the creatures. This one was tall and impossibly thin, with pale skin that almost glowed in the thick mist. Its face was hidden beneath a dark cloak, but I could see the faint outline of glowing eyes peeking out from the shadows. I froze. The creature had stopped, watching me from across the clearing. It didn't move, didn't make a sound. It was as though it were waiting for something. My breath caught in my chest, my hands trembling as I reached for my weapon. The figure remained still, its glowing eyes fixed on me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. The forest seemed to press in tighter, as though it was closing in on me, trapping me in this nightmare. The figure stepped forward. Its eyes gleamed brighter, colder, with an unnatural light. Then, in a voice that chilled me to my very bones, it spoke. "You are not meant to be here." My heart hammered in my chest as the figure moved closer, its form flickering like it wasn't fully part of this world. The air around it seemed to bend, its edges distorting as if it were a shadow in the fog, flickering and fading in and out. I gripped my revolver harder, my fingers numb from the cold, but the figure didn't seem to care. It moved effortlessly toward me, each step deliberate and slow, as though savoring my fear. "You've awakened something," it said, its voice low and almost comforting in its quiet menace. "The forest, it has chosen you." I didn't understand. What did it mean? I had come here to do my job. I wasn't part of whatever nightmare this was. "Chosen," I repeated, the word tasting foreign on my tongue. "What do you mean?" The figure didn't answer immediately. It just watched me, its glowing eyes never leaving mine. The stillness in the air felt like it was suffocating me, as if every moment I spent in the presence of this creature drained me further. The fog around us thickened, turning darker with each passing second. "The forest has always been here," the figure continued, its voice growing colder, "and it will always return to what it was before. You were never meant to see this. You were never meant to understand it." I took a step back, my heart racing in my chest. "I don't care about your damn forest," I shouted. "I just want to get out of here. People are missing. There are bodies out there, and whatever the hell you are, it's killing people." The figure stepped forward again, its pace unhurried, deliberate. "The forest will reclaim what is its own, and those who disturb it will pay the price." It raised a hand, and in that moment, I saw it. The trees behind it began to twist and writhe, their roots snaking out from the earth like serpents, reaching for me. The sound of cracking bark filled the air, and the ground beneath me seemed to shift, as though the earth was alive, pulling at me, drawing me into it. I didn't have time to think. I turned and ran, adrenaline fueling my legs as I pushed through the thick fog. But the trees were closing in, their limbs reaching for me like claws. The growls from the creatures behind me returned, their sounds growing closer, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. The path ahead was no longer clear. The forest had become a maze, and with every step I took, I felt like it was closing in on me, pushing me towards something I couldn't yet understand. I had no idea how far I had run, or how much time had passed. The world around me had turned into a blur, a nightmare that I couldn't escape. But ahead, I saw the faint outline of the ranger station. I couldn't stop. Not yet. But the forest was waiting for me, and the deeper I went, the more I realized I wasn't meant to leave. The station loomed ahead, its silhouette barely visible through the thick fog that hung like a veil in the air. Every step I took toward it felt like an eternity, the trees seeming to close in around me, as though the forest itself was alive waiting for me to make one wrong move. My heart raced in my chest, and each labored breath felt like it was becoming harder to take. The growls were closer now, a chorus of low guttural sounds that resonated deep in my bones. The creatures were on my tail, and the forest was closing in faster than I could run. I reached the station door, my hands trembling as I fumbled for the key. Every moment felt like it could be my last. The dark shapes in the mist were too close now, their glowing eyes flickering in the trees. The forest was alive with their movements, and I knew I wasn't going to outrun them. Finally, the door clicked open, and I rushed inside, slamming it shut behind me. I slid down the door, my back pressed against the cold wood as I tried to catch my breath. The growls outside had stopped, but I knew they were still out there waiting, watching. I looked around the room, my eyes scanning the familiar surroundings of the ranger station. The silence inside was deafening. No sound of the radio, no phone ringing, no wildlife calling from the trees outside. It was as if the world had fallen silent in response to the darkness that had begun to seep in. I ran to the radio, trying to tune in, but there was nothing but static. The same cold, unfeeling static that I'd been hearing for the past few hours. The creature's growl echoed in my ears, a memory that felt like it was coming from inside my head. Whatever it was, whatever this forest was, it was far beyond anything I had ever dealt with. This was no mere animal. This was something primal, something ancient that had waited for centuries to be unleashed. I collapsed into the chair, my head spinning. What had happened to Mike and Tom? I had seen their packs, their clothes, but they were gone, and now I was alone. The creatures had taken them, I was sure of it. They had been too close, too quick, and the darkness was so much more than what I had ever imagined. Then I heard it, a knock on the door. I froze. My heart nearly stopped. No one was supposed to be here. No one could have gotten this close without me seeing them. The knock came again, louder this time. A slow, deliberate tap, 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 and then a voice. "Ron," it whispered. I stood up, my legs weak, my pulse thudding in my ears. The voice low, almost like a rasp, sounded familiar. It was Mike's voice, but it couldn't be him. It couldn't be. "Mike," I called out hesitantly, my breath catching in my throat. "Mike, is that you?" There was silence for a moment, then another knock. "Let me in," the voice said, more urgent now. "You have to let me in." I backed away from the door, my heart hammering in my chest. The voice wasn't right. It wasn't Mike. It couldn't be. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. Something was wrong. Something was terribly wrong. "Mike," I said again, my voice shaky. I can't. You're not you. You can't be." A soft laugh came from the other side of the door, low and hollow. "Of course, I'm Mike," the voice said. "You know it's me. You've seen what I've become." I backed away further, my mind whirling. The words felt like they were turning inside me, suffocating me. Something wasn't right. I had seen Mike's pack, the blood stains, the torn clothes. There was no way that was him. Not anymore. I reached for the radio again, hoping for some kind of help, but the static mocked me. My chest tightened with panic, and I could feel the darkness closing in, even inside the station. The forest wasn't just outside anymore. It had come inside. The voice at the door grew louder, more insistent. "Let me in, Ron. Let me in. You can't fight this. The forest has chosen. I've become a part of it." I stumbled backward, my mind reeling, but my legs wouldn't obey. My breath was short, ragged, as if the air in the room had turned heavy, thick with the pressure of something unseen. The voice at the door no longer just Mike, but something else pushed against my thoughts, like an intrusive, malevolent force. It was then that I heard it, a rustling in the corner of the room. I spun around, my eyes searching in the darkness of the small ranger station. The shadows seemed to shift and stretch unnaturally, as though they were alive, twisting toward me. Something was moving in the corner, something too large to be ignored. And then I saw it. A figure emerged from the shadows, a man. No, a creature. It had Mike's face, but it wasn't Mike. His eyes were wide, glazed over, his skin pale and stretched tightly over his bones. His mouth hung open in a grotesque grin, revealing teeth far too sharp, too long, like a predator's. "Ron," the creature rasped, its voice the same as the one at the door. It's time to join us." My body froze, terror gripping my chest. My mind screamed at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The figure moved toward me, its body flickering like smoke, its steps unnaturally quick. The room seemed to close in around me, the walls narrowing, suffocating. And then, before I could react, the door exploded inward with a deafening crash. The door was ripped from its hinges, the force sending it crashing across the room. I barely had time to react before a wave of shadow-filled creatures poured in, their eyes glowing in the dark, their bodies like twisted versions of humans, some crawling on all fours, others walking upright with unnatural, jerking movements. The figure that had once been Mike, now completely lost to the darkness, stepped through the wreckage of the door, his grin wide and unnatural. "Join us, Ron," he whispered, his voice no longer just a whisper, but a chorus of twisted voices in his mind. "The forest is alive, and it's waiting for you." The creatures encircled me, their presence suffocating, pressing in from every angle. I could feel the pull of the darkness, the cold tendrils of fear creeping through me. My thoughts became sluggish, clouded by the overwhelming weight of it all. But something inside me broke free. "No," I gasped, pushing through the fog in my mind. "I won't join you. I'll never be part of this." I reached for the nearest object, anything to defend myself. My hand found the broken piece of the door frame, and I swung it at the nearest creature, knocking it back with all the strength I had left. But the creatures didn't retreat. They closed in, and then, with the last of my strength, I broke free from the spell. I forced myself to move, scrambling toward the window and smashing it open. The cold air hit my face like a shock, and I leaped out into the night, the creatures' growls echoing in my ears. The forest was no longer just a backdrop. It had become part of me, part of this nightmare. The darkness was inside me now, its call relentless. I ran through the night, not knowing where I was going, only knowing that I couldn't stop. The woods would claim me, but I wasn't ready to be consumed. Not yet. I ran, my legs pumped furiously through the thick underbrush, the dark, twisted trees clawing at my skin as I plunged deeper into the woods. The moon had disappeared behind thick clouds, and the only light came from the faint glow of the creature's eyes, flickering in the darkness. They were behind me. I could feel them closing in, but I couldn't afford to look back. I couldn't afford to slow down. The whispers in my head, voices of the creatures, of the forest itself, became louder with each step. "You can't escape. You can't outrun the darkness." The words slithered through my thoughts, a cold, insidious presence in my mind. The forest was alive. It was awake, and it wanted me. I stumbled over a hidden root, barely catching myself before crashing to the ground. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. The forest seemed to be swallowing the path behind me, the trees closing in, blocking out what little light there was. My heart thundered in my chest, my breath ragged, but I kept running, driven by a single thought: escape. The growls behind me intensified. I could hear the creatures gaining ground. They were fast, too fast. The whispers grew louder, and I knew there was no way I could outrun them forever. I pushed harder, my legs burning with the strain, but the creatures were relentless. Their growls echoed through the trees, reverberating in my very bones, until it felt like the forest itself was alive with hunger. The air around me thickened, the shadows deeper, and the oppressive weight of the darkness began to press in from all sides. The trees closed in. I was trapped. I skidded to a halt, my feet slipping on the damp ground as I looked around frantically. There was no way out. The forest had already swallowed me. The path was gone, replaced by twisted roots and strange, malformed trees that seemed to bend toward me, reaching for me with their gnarled branches. And the creatures, they were close, too close now. I could feel their breath on my neck, hear the low, guttural growls vibrating through the air. I turned to face them. They were there, 2 of them, at least, but more were coming. Their eyes burned with a hunger that was impossible to ignore. Their claws scraped the earth like knives on stone, their bodies flickering and shifting, barely material, as though they didn't belong in this world. One of them lunged at me, its jaws snapping, its fangs sharp and glistening in the dim light. Without thinking, I raised my arm, the revolver shaking in my hand. I fired. The sound of the gunshot was deafening, but the creature didn't recoil. It didn't even flinch. The bullet passed straight through it, as though it was nothing more than smoke. The creature screeched, a shrill, terrible sound that split the air, and the others closed in. My heart pounded louder than the growls of the beasts, and I realized there was no escape. The darkness had already claimed me. The air was growing colder. I could feel the presence of the forest around me, its power rising like an unseen force. The trees groaned and creaked, and I knew, deep in my gut, that this wasn't just a battle for survival. This was something far worse. The forest was not only alive, it was feeding on me. I turned to run again, but the creature was already on me. It pounced, its claws digging into my shoulders as it knocked me to the ground. I tried to push it off, but it was too strong. My revolver flew from my hand, and I could feel its hot breath on my face as its fangs bit. A shadow loomed over me, tall, dark, and unmistakable. The figure that had been following me, the Watcher. It stood motionless, watching as the creature loomed over me, its form flickering like smoke in the wind. "Get up," the Watcher said, its voice low and cold, its eyes gleaming in the darkness. "You cannot escape this. The forest has claimed you. The darkness is inside you." I couldn't move. The weight of the creature pressing down on me was suffocating, and the Watcher's words cut through me like ice. It was true. The forest had claimed me, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. The creature's claws dug into my flesh, and I screamed as it ripped at me, tearing through my clothes and skin. But just as the darkness was about to consume me entirely, a flash of light erupted from the Watcher's form, filling the clearing with a blinding glow. The creature screeched again, but this time it recoiled, its form flickering as though it were being torn apart by the light. The Watcher raised its hand, and the creature dissolved into the air, its body evaporating into mist. Warren lay there, gasping for breath, the pain in his shoulder radiating through his entire body. The creature was gone, but the Watcher's presence still filled the air. The darkness was retreating, for now, but Warren knew that this wasn't over. The forest had only given him a temporary reprieve. The Watcher looked down at him, its expression unreadable. "You are part of the forest now," it said, its voice low and full of finality. "There is no escape from what you have awakened. The darkness will always find you." Warren struggled to his feet, his body trembling from the pain and fear. He didn't know what the Watcher meant. He didn't know what was happening, or why this forest had chosen him, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't stop fighting. He wouldn't let the forest take him without a fight. "I won't give in," Warren said, his voice raw. "I won't become part of this." The Watcher didn't respond. It simply turned away, vanishing into the mist, leaving Warren to face the growing darkness alone. Warren limped forward, his body aching, his mind reeling from everything he had just encountered. The Watcher's words echoed in his mind, but he couldn't focus on them. His immediate concern was survival. He needed to get back to the ranger station. He needed to warn someone, anyone, before the forest consumed him. The creatures were still out there. He could feel their presence, their eyes watching from the shadows. The forest was closing in around him, and the weight of it pressed on his chest like a vice. He stumbled through the trees, pushing his way through the thick underbrush, his mind focused on only one thing: getting away from the darkness. But as he reached the edge of the clearing, he saw something that made his heart stop. There, standing in the mist, was a figure, a woman, her face pale, her hair black and matted with dirt. her eyes wide and unblinking. "Tom," Warren whispered, his voice hoarse with disbelief. The woman stepped forward, her eyes fixed on him, but there was something wrong about her. Something cold, something unnatural. "You shouldn't have come here," she said, her voice too calm, too flat. "Now, you're part of it." Warren felt his legs give out beneath him as he looked into her hollow eyes. She wasn't Tom. She wasn't human. The creatures, the darkness, it had taken her, and now it was coming for him. The figure of the woman stood still, her eyes glowing with an unnatural intensity. It was as though she were a shell, an empty vessel consumed by the forest's darkness. Her face, pale and gaunt, was stretched into an eerie, vacant expression. She stepped closer, the air growing colder as she did, her movements too slow, too deliberate. Warren's mind raced. This wasn't Tom. This wasn't someone who had been lost to the wilderness. No, she was something else, something created by the forest. Something twisted. "What happened to you?" Warren managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper, his heart pounding in his chest. The woman didn't respond immediately. Instead, she tilted her head to one side, her hollow eyes never leaving his. The forest around them seemed to grow even quieter, the sounds of the wind, the leaves, the distant growls of the creatures, all of it muffled as if the air itself were holding its breath. "You should never have come," she said, her voice monotone, robotic, as though the words weren't hers but had been forced upon her. "The forest takes what it needs." Warren's blood ran cold. She was speaking for the forest. It wasn't just the creatures hunting him. The forest itself, the ancient evil that ran through the roots of every tree, was alive, sentient, and it was using her as a mouthpiece. "You're not real," Warren muttered, backing away, his heart hammering in his chest. It meant something else. Something twisted. The woman's lips curled into a grotesque smile, but it wasn't one of recognition or warmth. It was the smile of something much darker, much older. "It is already too late," she said, her voice becoming more and more alien with each word, the darkness inside her seeping into her tone. "The forest has awakened, and now it claims what is its own, and you, Warren Whitman, have no place outside it." Without another word, she lunged forward, faster than he could react. Her hands grabbed his shoulders, her fingers digging into his flesh with an unnatural strength. Warren gasped as pain shot through him. He could feel the coldness of her grip seeping into his skin, as though it wasn't just her hands touching him, but the forest itself, wrapping around him, trying to claim him. A growl sounded from behind him. The creatures were closing in. "No," Warren gasped, forcing himself to move, shoving her hands off of him with all the strength he could muster. He twisted away, stumbling back as she watched him, her eyes glowing with a hollow hunger. "Leave me alone," he shouted, his voice raw, panic rising in his chest. He knew he couldn't outrun the forest, not with the creatures, not with the woman, and certainly not with the weight of the darkness pressing in on him. He turned and ran, not even looking back, his legs pumping faster than they ever had before, the growls of the creatures growing louder in the distance. Warren's breath came in ragged gasps as he sprinted through the trees. The growls of the creatures were closing in, and he could feel the shadows behind him, following him, stalking him with a predatory hunger. The forest wasn't just closing in around him, it was alive, its very roots reaching for him, its branches scraping at him like claws. He didn't dare look back. Every part of his body screamed to keep running, but it felt as though the path was narrowing, the trees squeezing him in. The fog around him thickened, swirling, disorienting him, making it impossible to see beyond a few feet in front of him. "Come on," Warren muttered to himself, his legs burning with exhaustion. "Don't stop. Don't stop." His foot caught on a hidden route, and he stumbled forward, catching himself with his hands on the wet ground. His heart pounded in his chest, but there was no time to catch his breath. He scrambled to his feet, panic surging as the growls grew louder, closer. And then, ahead of him, something shifted, a shape, a figure, another watcher. It was standing still, just at the edge of the trees, its glowing eyes fixed on him. It was taller than the others, its form more distinct, more solid. Its face was hidden, but its presence was undeniable. "You cannot escape," the watcher's voice echoed in his mind, as cold as the mist surrounding him. "The forest does not forget, and it does not forgive." Warren's chest tightened. The watcher was in his path, its figure blocking his way to safety. He couldn't go around it. The darkness had already claimed the forest, and now it wanted him. The growls of the creatures behind him grew louder, fiercer. The watcher stepped forward, its form flickering, fading in and out, like a shadow stretching across the land. "Join us," the watcher said, its voice deep and resonating, as though it were speaking for the forest itself. "The forest will claim you. There is no escape. You are part of it now." Warren's heart raced, but there was no time to hesitate. With a scream, he pushed forward, charging toward the watcher with everything he had. He couldn't stop. He couldn't let the forest claim him. Not like this. Not without a fight. As he reached the watcher, something inside him snapped. A surge of light exploded from his chest, brighter than any flashlight he had ever held, more powerful than anything he had ever experienced. The watcher screamed, its form flickering wildly, before it dissolved into the mist. The creatures screeched in pain, retreating into the shadows as the light pushed them back. Warren fell to his knees, breathless, the energy draining from him as quickly as it had surged. The forest fell silent again. The creatures were gone. The watcher was gone, but the darkness, it was still there, just out of sight, waiting. The creatures were there, just behind him, their eyes flashing in the darkness, their limbs too long, too twisted. Warren could hear their breath, harsh and labored, as they moved in on him. He had to get to the ranger station. He had to get to safety. But the fog, the trees, the darkness, everything seemed to be fighting against him. Every step felt like the forest was closing in on him, pulling him toward something far worse than just the creatures. The ground shook beneath him again, the roots shifting as though the earth itself were waking up, moving underfoot. Warren sat on the ground, his chest rising and falling as he tried to catch his breath. The forest around him was still, too still, and the fog pressed in like an oppressive weight. The creatures were gone, but he knew they weren't far. They would come back. They always came back. His heart was still pounding, and his mind raced with the implications of what had just happened. The watcher had spoken the truth. The forest had claimed him. He was part of it now, whether he liked it or not. He had fought back, for now, but how long could he hold out? How long could anyone hold out against the darkness that was growing stronger by the day? "I can't stop," Warren whispered to himself, his voice hoarse. "I can't let it win." But in the back of his mind, he knew the truth. The darkness had already claimed the forest, and soon it would come for him, and there would be no escape. The air was thick with dread, as if the very forest was breathing in time with Warren's ragged breaths. He stood alone in the eerie silence, the distant echoes of creatures retreating still hanging in the air. It felt like the calm before the storm, the momentary stillness that only served to heighten the tension, the unbearable weight of what was to come. Every step forward felt like it was pushing him deeper into the heart of a nightmare. The woods around him seemed to press inward, their dark forms bending toward him like unseen hands, wrapping around him, suffocating him. He turned back, but the path was already vanishing in the mist. The trees had closed in behind him. There was no escape. The creatures were still out there, just beyond the veil of the fog. He knew they were watching, waiting for their next move. But it wasn't just the creatures he feared. It was the very forest itself. The ground beneath his feet, the roots, the trees, they were all connected. all part of the same ancient, insidious force, and it was alive. Warren could still feel the thrum of the darkness inside him. The power he had tapped into earlier, the light that had pushed the creatures back, it had been his only weapon. But even that was a temporary solution. The Watcher's warning played in his mind. The forest has claimed you. There is no escape. He couldn't run. He couldn't hide. Not anymore. Warren, a voice called from behind him. He whipped around, his heart racing in his chest. It was Micah's voice, but it sounded wrong. Hollow, distant, almost inhuman. "Mike," Warren asked, his voice trembling. "Is that you?" The figure that emerged from the fog was a twisted version of his friend. Mike's face was pale, his eyes empty and glassy. His skin was stretched thin over his bones, and there was something wrong about the way he moved, too slow, too deliberate. His arms were hanging at his sides, his fingers clawed and bent in unnatural angles. "It's too late, Warren," Mike rasped, his voice no longer his own. "You're part of the forest now. You belong to it." Warren's heart thudded painfully in his chest. His mind was a blur of thoughts of survival, of escape, but there was no escaping this, no running from it. Mike had been taken, just like Tom, just like the others. "Mike, I won't join you," Warren said, trying to steady his breathing, though his chest was tight with fear. "I'll stop it. I'll make sure this ends." Mike's twisted lips curled into a grin, but it wasn't a friendly grin. It was something darker. "You can't. You've already been marked." The words were a knife in his chest. It was true. He had been marked. The darkness had claimed him, just as it had claimed the others. His very presence in the forest had allowed it to grow stronger. With a sudden movement, Mike lunged at him, his twisted form moving with unnatural speed. Warren barely had time to react, as he staggered backward, pulling his revolver from his holster. But his hands were shaking, his body unsteady from exhaustion and fear. Mike was too fast, too strong. The revolver fired, the shot ringing out in the heavy silence of the forest, but it did no good. The bullet passed through Mike's chest, but there was no blood, no wound. Mike didn't even flinch. The creature that was wearing Mike's skin didn't care. It was part of the forest, part of the darkness. Warren stumbled back, terror surging through his veins as Mike's claws raked toward him. He had to escape. He had to find a way out. But the forest wasn't going to let him. Warren ran. He didn't know where he was going, only that he had to move, had to get away from the twisted figure of Mike and the darkness that had claimed the forest. The trees loomed around him, pressing in, their branches reaching down like skeletal hands, trying to grab him, pull him back into the heart of the nightmare. His legs burned with exhaustion, but he couldn't stop. The growls of the creatures echoed behind him, too close, too fast. Their glowing eyes pierced through the fog like hunters' lanterns, tracking him, hunting him. He could feel the forest closing in on him, the darkness pressing down on him from all sides. The trees seemed to shift and change, their trunks bending in on the path ahead, forcing him to veer off into the unknown. And then he saw it, the heart of the forest. It wasn't just a clearing, it was something older, a structure that shouldn't exist in the middle of the woods. The trees had grown around it, the stone foundation cracked and worn with age. It looked like an altar, an offering place, dark, sacred, ancient. The forest had led him here. This was where it all began, the source of the darkness, the heart of the forest. Warren stood at the edge of the clearing, staring at the ancient stone structure. He knew what he had to do. He had to destroy it. This was where the veil had been broken. This was where the creatures had been released. The forest had opened the door, and now it was time to close it. He stepped forward, his legs heavy, his body aching from the struggle. But there was no other choice. He couldn't let the darkness win. As he approached the altar, the air grew colder. the trees around him groaning as if protesting his every step. The growls of the creatures intensified, but Warren ignored them. He knew that the only way to stop this was to sever the heart of the forest, to destroy the source of the darkness. The altar, this structure, was the key, but the moment he stepped onto the stone platform, the ground beneath him trembled. The forest roared in response, a deafening sound that shook the very air around him. The darkness was fighting back, and then the Watcher appeared. The Watcher stood in front of the altar, its eyes glowing with that cold, inhuman light. It raised its hand, and the trees around them began to move, their branches lashing out like whips. The ground shook violently, as if the forest itself were trying to throw Warren from the altar. "You cannot stop this," the Watcher said, its voice low and resonating. "The forest has already chosen. You are nothing but a tool in its design. The darkness will take you, and you will become part of it." Warren's blood boiled. He couldn't let this happen. He had to end it, here and now. His hands shook, but he knew he couldn't stop. The forest would consume everything, and everyone. The Watcher's words rang in his mind, but he wouldn't let them win. He pulled out his revolver, but this time, he wasn't aiming for the Watcher. He was aiming for the altar, the heart of the darkness. With all his strength, he pulled the trigger. The bullet struck the altar, and for a moment, everything stopped. The air was still, the creatures silent. The Watcher's eyes widened, and the ground shook once more, but this time, it was different. The altar cracked. The stone split apart, with an ear-splitting noise, and the dark energy that had been holding the forest together erupted, pouring out like a tidal wave. The trees screamed, their trunks splitting as the darkness bled into the sky. The creatures shrieked in agony, their forms disintegrating, returning to the nothingness from which they came. But the Watcher stood still, watching as the altar shattered. Its form flickered, its glowing eyes dimming. "You have broken the cycle," it said, its voice almost disappointed, but at what cost? Warren's legs buckled, the exhaustion overwhelming him as the last of the darkness faded into the air. The creatures were gone. The Watchers were gone, but so much had been lost. The silence that followed was almost deafening. The forest, once alive with the growls of the creatures, the whispers of the Watchers, was now still. The air was thick, but no longer suffocating. The fog had lifted, revealing the stars above. Warren stood alone at the broken altar, his heart still racing in his chest, his body aching from the fight. The forest was quiet, too quiet. The creatures were gone, but so was the life they had once known. The darkness had been purged, but the cost was heavy. The veil was broken, and though the creatures had vanished, the forest, this cursed place, would never be the same again. Warren looked around, the weight of his decisions settling in. He had survived, but the forest had claimed its price. And the darkness, it would return. It always did. The only question was, how long until it did?